Hey everybody, hope and pray that you're doing well today as we come to our word from the word. And today that word is caring. Caring. I know that you may have missed everything last week. Had revival going on last week at Milton, and so didn't do any word from the word last week. And I know sometimes I'll get a message from y'all, hey, are you doing it this week? Look, we're back, and I pray that we'll be able to do this every day for Monday through Friday for the rest of this year. But we'll just see what the Lord has in store for us. But today, as we're transitioning over into Second Samuel, it's amazing to think from January that this is as far as we've gotten is to Second Samuel, and some of what even we'll deal with will be. Really, you can find the same passages or more details in First and Second Chronicles. That the same through First and Second Samuel, especially Second Samuel, and then into First and Second Kings. A lot of these information is recorded there together, so we can also use them to go back and show us some things that are going on. That really comes into play today. This week we're going to deal with 5 chapters of Second Samuel, and I'm just going to I pray as always you're looking at all the passages. We're going to pull out just a verse or two of what's going on. But basically, as we start this week and start our time in Second Samuel, we see that Saul has died. He died in battle, and there's some conflicting reports. If you look to First Samuel and then on into Chronicles, and the report that this Amalekite messenger brings in chapter 1, claiming that he was the one responsible. And so it seems to be that he comes and is lying, and he's trying to basically make David think more highly of him than he should. And here's the point: he thinks that David will be excited and glad that Saul is dead. Now, there's something with David, as we've seen, that he's had the opportunity to cause harm to Saul several times, even though Saul was continuing to chase him, and he was able to withstand that temptation. And you remember, he said, "Look, I'm not going to do anything to the Lord's anointed." Basically, if God wants me on the throne, then God's going to put me on the throne in his own time. And so it's also very obvious that David has a heart after God's own heart, but a heart that is caring. And that's why that's our word for today. After the messenger comes and tells him that Saul is dead, here's verses 11 and 12 of chapter 1 in Second Samuel. Therefore, David took hold of his own clothes and tore them, and so did all the men who were with him. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, for the people of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. In other words, this was a time when David and his men would join in the mourning with everyone who was affected by Saul's death. Yes, David didn't like the fact, really, that Saul was king and the fact that he was coming after him. But see, that's because the reason that David could weep and mourn, and him and his men as well, is because they had faith and they had their eyes on God and not their eyes on men. And we could learn a lot from that. Now, this isn't particularly a prayer, but you can imagine that with the weeping and fasting that would go on in this mourning process, that there would have been some prayers and conversations going on with God. God, why did you allow this to happen? Or God, help us to see what you're doing through this time of grief. And I know right now, especially in our day and time, this is probably a conversation that we have with God more often than we would like. God, what are you doing? Why do some families seem to suffer and some do not? And that even goes back to our revival with Job. But see, David is being very smart and he's being very patient with the Lord. And we're going to see that throughout this week, that as he is looking and seeking God's will for every part of his life, he doesn't act in the wrong way. See, this Amalekite messenger has come to David thinking that David and his men are going to be excited. So you can imagine his surprise when David and his men began tearing their clothes and begin the mourning process. And I'll let you read the story, but you'll see that this Amalekite is actually, he has to face the end of God's judgment, because God had told them to wipe out the Amalekites. And even though Saul was not obedient, we find out that David is. But with all that, what can we take from that today? Well, here's my thing is I want you to be careful, and I want you to be mindful of being caring in the way that you hear bad news, and to be careful in the way that you handle good news as well. See, what you might be tempted, right, to hear that something bad has happened to an enemy. But let's remember that God is still in control, and we could be at the end of that judgment at any moment. See, we have to be caring no matter what happens. We go back to, even with Job, to be praying for our friends and to be praying for our enemies. Isn't that what God said? To bless those who curse you. Pray for those who persecute you. It's not easy, but if we want to have a heart after God's own heart like David did, then we need to be caring in much in our words and our actions, but especially in our prayers. So what friend, or rather what enemy, will you pray for today? God bless you, and I pray you have a great, great day.